Chapter 4. I stayed in that little stone room for another 10 minutes, pressing my back against the rough wooden door, like it was a shield that could magically protect me from the absurdity of my new reality. My heart was still racing from the corporate wizard conversation I had just eavesdropped on. Every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the golden circle on my forehead. It was pulsing faintly against my skin, like a secondary, terrifying heartbeat, constantly reminding me that I was very, very far from my boring apartment. Nothing made sense. The corporate complainers in the red robes had mentioned a vampire. Vampires? Really? I had spent my entire life assuming those were just cheap stories invented to scare kids around campfires. But after literally stepping through a glowing golden portal in an alley by my local pharmacy, I honestly wasn't so sure about anything anymore. Eventually, the silence in the room became more suffocating than my panic. I gathered whatever pathetic scraps of courage I had left and pushed off the wall. I cracked the heavy wooden door open just enough to peek into whatever nightmare was waiting for me beyond it. Plain, simple corridor? Huh? I thought, squinting through the gap. It stretched out incredibly long and thoroughly unremarkable, lined with countless heavy wooden doors. Every single one of them was weathered and deeply scratched, looking like they had been actively abused for centuries. The walls themselves were made of a rough, ugly stone, tougher than the smooth granite of the closet I had just hidden in. Their surfaces were uneven and spotted with gross, creeping patches of moss that glowed faintly, casting a dim green light over the entire hallway. The floor, however, stayed weirdly true to its dull, polished marble, reflecting the disgusting green glow in its fractured, spidery patterns. It felt exactly like stepping into an ancient haunted castle or a medieval dungeon. I honestly couldn't decide which option was worse. I stepped out cautiously, incredibly thankful that my worn-out sneakers made absolutely no sound on the freezing cold marble. To my left, about 5 meters away, a narrow window broke up the endless stretch of the rough stone wall. To my right, sitting heavily in the center of the hall, I spotted a strange circular platform. It had 2 oval protrusions sticking out of it. Their surfaces were perfectly smooth and metallic, flaring faintly under the green moss light. The air out here was suffocatingly heavy. It carried a faint, disturbing metallic odor, like ancient rust mixed with something horribly sour. I wrinkled my nose in disgust, trying to place the terrible smell. It reminded me of the old leaky pipes in my school's basement, but much sharper, more alive. I decided to check the window first, desperately hoping to get at least some picture of where the hell I had landed. My footsteps echoed softly as I approached the glass. The window was pathetic. Its metal frame was completely rusty and violently deformed, and the glass was so thick with grime it looked like it hadn't been cleaned in decades. I leaned in, squinting hard through the fogged panel. Outside, a plain, massive stone wall completely blocked the entire view. Its surface was cracked and covered in more of that gross, glowing moss. Above that wall, hovering about 2 meters over some patchy, yellowed grass, was another window, just as filthy, with its edges blackened heavily by thick soot. The grass down below looked incredibly sickly, pointed to the ground, as if it was actively trying to hide from the dim, pathetic light. What a dump. Wow, I thought, letting out a heavy, disappointed sigh. And that's the magical world? I want a refund. I turned away from the miserable view, but my own reflection caught me in the dirty glass for a moment. The golden circle on my forehead seemed to shimmer, glowing noticeably brighter now, like it was actively reacting to something in the air. I reached up and touched it, half expecting my skin to sizzle and burn, but it was surprisingly cool to the touch, almost comforting. "What the hell are you?" I wondered. My fingers traced its smooth, unnatural edge. The mark didn't move, it remained as stubborn as ever. Suddenly, for a split second, I saw something else in the reflection. A pair of floating, blood-red eyes, glowing maliciously right above my right shoulder. My heart shot straight into my throat. I quickly spun around in pure panic. My fists rose instinctively, but there was absolutely nothing there. Or maybe I thought I saw them, I reasoned with myself. My breath came in short gasps. I'm losing my mind. That's what's happening. Sleep deprivation and magical fumes. The corridor still seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, lit up only by the faint, miserable green glow of the moss. Now that my adrenaline was spiking, I noticed more details. Scratches on the walls, deep, jagged marks on the stone, exactly like claw marks. Some of them looked terrifyingly fresh. The stone around them was chipped and raw, while others were older, smoothed over by years of time. My stomach violently twisted. Claws? What kind of claws? I thought of the vampire that Chorus concern had mentioned in the office, and my palms instantly grew sweaty. I wiped them aggressively to my jeans, trying to force myself to steady my breathing. Just keep moving, Max. Don't think about it. If you don't think about the murder and claws, they don't exist. I walked away from the window and headed towards the weird platform. My eyes nervously darted to every single shadow, jumping at every creak of the ancient stone. The doors lining the corridor were all closed tight. Their handles were rusty, and some were hanging loose, looking like they hadn't been touched or opened in years. But then, one door caught my attention. It was slightly open, just a crack, and a faint beam of light was spilling out into the hallway. It was warm and golden, entirely unlike the cold, dead green of the moss. I hesitated. My hand hovered nervously over the rusty handle. Maybe there's someone inside, my desperate brain reasoned. Someone who can help. Someone who isn't a corporate boomer or a vampire. But the memory of the men's voices immediately made me pause. We shut down all the magic in this part of the corridor. What if this was a trap? I leaned closer anyways, pressing my ear to the heavy wood. At first, there was nothing but the distant, ambient hum of the corridor, but then I heard it, a soft, highly rhythmic tapping, exactly like fingers drumming impatiently on the wood. Tap tap, pause, tap tap tap, pause. It went on, perfectly steady and deliberate, like someone tapping out a code. My heart raced. Someone's in there, I realized. But who? I thought of the man in the black blazer, the thrift store weirdo I had followed through the portal. Could it be him, or maybe someone else? Someone infinitely worse? I couldn't help myself. I pushed the door open a tiny fraction more, just enough to peek one eye inside. The room was surprisingly small. Its stone walls were lined with heavy shelves that were literally sinking under the immense weight of dusty, ancient books and a strange, glowing orbs that pulsed faintly in the dark, looking exactly like dying stars. In the absolute center of the room sat a figure, hunched over a wooden table with its back to the door. It was wrapped in a thick, dark purple cloak, the ragged edges of which were stained heavily with something dark, mud or maybe even dried blood. Suddenly, the tapping stopped abruptly. The figure froze perfectly still, as if it could physically sense my presence in the doorway. I held my breath. My hand tightened on the doorframe until my knuckles ached. The figure's head tilted slightly to the side, exactly like a predator listening for a heartbeat, and then it slowly began to turn towards me. I didn't wait to see its face. Absolutely not. I slammed the heavy wooden door shut. Its rusty hinges squealed violently in protest, and I stumbled backwards into the safety of the corridor. I pressed my back flat against the cold stone wall, exhaling a shaky breath, just waiting for the sound of footsteps, waiting for the door to burst open and some cloaked nightmare to drag me inside. But nothing came. The corridor stayed completely silent, and the golden light from the room simply disappeared underneath the crack of the door, as if it had never been there at all. I exhaled shakily, staring at my violently trembling hands. I'm not ready for this, I thought desperately. I don't even know what this is. I hurried away from the door, practically running towards the platform in the center of the hall. My steps were much faster now, and the horrific claw marks imprinted into the walls seemed to grow deeper and far more menacing the closer I got to the center of the room. The platform itself was bizarre. It had two distinct oval protrusions set perfectly into a circular base made of the same marble as floor, except this base was polished to a flawless, mirror-like shine. The ovals were completely metallic, and I noticed their smooth surfaces were etched with faint, intricate runes. As I stepped closer, the runes surprisingly started to glow in a soft, welcoming blue color. I hesitated, glancing nervously back down the dark corridor. The air felt significantly colder now, and the metallic, bloody odor was growing sharper, almost biting at the back of my throat. Something was very wrong. I could feel it in my bones, like a massive physical weight was actively pressing down on my chest. The exact moment my sneaker touched one of the glowing oval protrusions, a highly melodic, robotic female voice rang out from absolutely nowhere, echoing loudly off the stone walls. The last transfer occurred 36 minutes and 33 seconds ago to the destination Darton. The disembodied voice announced smoothly. Would you like to transfer? I froze entirely, with my foot still resting on the platform. Transfer? To where? I looked around wildly, half expecting to see some receptionist or a glowing robot watching me, but the corridor was completely empty. The voice had come directly from the platform itself, I realized, as the blue runes pulsated brighter in perfect time with each spoken word. No, thanks, I stumbled. My voice sounded incredibly small and pathetic in the vast, echoing space. I'll let you know when I'm ready. I stepped back as my mind was racing at 1,000,000 kilometers an hour. Darton. That was obviously a place, but where? And how did this stupid glowing floor thing even work? I forced myself to study the platform more closely, noticing a series of small, intricate symbols carved deeply into the marble base. There were spirals, exactly like the one on the mysterious coin in my pocket, and the one burned onto my forehead, mixed in with other sharp shapes I didn't recognize at all. They looked eerily similar to the aggressive symbols on the scrolls I had seen on the desk in the wizard closet. Suddenly, my throat went completely dry. A sharp, terrifying sound scraped against the stone from behind me. I turned slowly. My heart literally climbed up into my throat. At the far end of the long corridor, right where the green glow of the moss was at its absolute dimmest, a shadow moved. It was tall, way too tall to be a normal human, and its dark edges blurred into the air around it like thick smoke. I squinted my eyes, desperately trying to make out any details, but the shadow quickly shifted, stepping deliberately into the light. My blood instantly ran ice cold. It was a vampire. A literal, actual vampire. He was completely bald, with pale, impossibly smooth skin that looked like porcelain. Long, horrific white fangs shine brightly in the faint green light, and a pair of piercing, glowing purple eyes seemed to bore straight through my skull. The creature's gaze locked onto me, and for a terrifying moment, time simply stopped. Then, completely out of nowhere, the vampire flinched violently, stepping backwards as if he had just been struck by something invisible. His massive body pushed back without making a single sound. I blinked, totally confused. Was there someone else here? But the corridor was still completely empty. The moss light cast long, lonely shadows. Wait, aren't those the red flying eyes I saw before? My brain screamed. Nah, I must be tripping. The vampire hesitated. His glowing purple eyes darted away for a split second before they snapped furiously back to me. A low, terrifying hiss ripped out of his pale lips, and I saw his hands, claws, long, black, and impossibly sharp, flexed aggressively at his sides. The horrific claw marks carved into the stone walls suddenly made absolute terrifying sense, and my stomach dropped through the floor. That's what made those scratches, I realized. The vampire took a slow step forward. His movements were calculated and deliberate, exactly like a predator stalking cornered prey. My legs felt like absolute jelly, but the sheer adrenaline forced me to move. I stumbled backwards to the glowing platform. The creature's purple eyes looked dead onto the golden circle burning on my forehead, and his hiss morphed into a cruel snarl. "Marked, are you?" he said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in my chest. "The department will pay well for you." My heart was pounding so hard I genuinely thought it was going to burst out of my ribcage. The department again? What do they want with me? I didn't have time to think or negotiate. The vampire darted forward with impossible speed. His black claws slashed violently through the empty air exactly where my neck had been a fraction of a second ago. I threw myself into a desperate dive to the side, crashing heavily onto the hard marble of the platform. My elbow slammed directly against the stone base with a sharp, sickening crack. Blinding pain shot all the way up my arm, but I ignored it, scrambling to get to my feet. The vampire whipped around, his purple eyes absolutely blazed with murderous rage, and readied himself to dash again. I threw my entire body onto the center of the platform, slamming both of my hands frantically onto the two oval protrusions. "I want to transfer," I screamed at the top of my lungs. My voice cracked wildly with pure, unfiltered panic. "I really want to transfer." The ancient runes on the platform flared instantly to life, glowing a brilliant, blinding blue color, and the heavy air around me began to violently shimmer. The vampire launched himself at me. His black claws swiped so incredibly close to my face that I felt the rush of cold air drag against my cheek. But the platform hummed louder, drowning out his snarl, and the green-lit corridor began to rapidly fade away into static. I squeezed my eyes shut. My hands gripped the metal oval so hard that my knuckles turned completely white. Whatever happens, happens, I thought, as my mind was racing in a chaotic cocktail of fear and adrenaline. I'm definitely not sticking around to get shredded by this vampire. The last sound I heard before the world disappeared was the vampire letting out a sudden agonized howl, sounding exactly like he had just been brutally punched by something massive or someone. But that thought was quickly cut off entirely. The dungeon, the vampire, and the entire world around me violently dissolved into a chaotic, swirling vortex of blinding blue light and rushing motion.